As you look back to all the previous championships in F1, I think 3 teams really stand out. Ferrari, Williams and McLaren. But as we all know, it hasn't always been peachy for these teams, especially McLaren and Williams, as McLaren have struggled to have a championship contending car for the past 10 years. But as I'm making this video, McLaren have had 2 podiums back to back and just came second in the Spa sprint race with Oscar Piastri. So the real question is, what is going on at McLaren? So I'm going to start off with the last few good seasons, not too far back into their history, otherwise this video would be about 2 hours long. But we'll start off in 2008, which was the final season where a McLaren driver won a championship. Funnily enough, they should have won it in 2007 as they had the best car, but they had all the Spygate issues and Alonso and Hamilton coming together quite a lot. But in 2008, Lewis Hamilton infamously won on the final race of the final lap of the final corner in Brazil to beat Felipe Massa to the title with the infamous "Is that Timo Glock" line.
Is that Glock? Is that Glock going slowly?
It is, it's Glock! Oh my goodness me!
Not only this, he managed 5 race wins during the season, and his teammate Heikki Kovalainen also managed 1 race win in Hungary that season, leaving them with 151 points, and bear in mind that was with the old point system, and second in the constructors' standings. Not a bad season at all for McLaren. Then, heading into 2009, obviously we had the regulation changes, which meant some teams went for that double diffuser, some teams didn't. McLaren was one of those teams, and funnily enough, this season actually reminds me quite a bit of the 2023 season so far, where McLaren are just off the pace at the start of the season, but they brought upgrades and just drastically improved their car throughout the season. As from Hungary that season, they managed to score 57 points from that point onwards and finished 3rd in the constructors with 71 points. And that really just does show how bad of a start to the season they had. And potentially in 2023, McLaren could do that as well. They look like they're better than the Ferraris at the minute and potentially could outperform the Aston till the end of the season. Let's get on to 2010, which was another great season for McLaren, coming second in the Constructors' Championship with 454 points to their name. Sadly, neither Button or Hamilton could win the championship that season. As we all know, on the final race of the season, Vettel won it out, and technically Hamilton could have won that championship, but out of the 4 drivers who were contending for it, Webber, Alonso, Vettel and Hamilton was the least likely, and they all really needed to crash for him to really have a chance. But even with that said, Jenson Button still managed 2 race wins, and Lewis Hamilton also managed 3 race wins and 16 podiums together in 1 season, which is phenomenal. Then I'll skim over 2011 as it's the same practically as 2010, where they did well in the constructors, coming second with 497 points. But then in 2012's when it starts to get a bit worse. Now, 2012 no doubt was a great season for McLaren. They potentially had one of the fastest cars on the grid, but they were just riddled with reliability problems. Button had 4 DNFs that year, with Hamilton also getting 6 DNFs, which led to Hamilton leaving McLaren for Mercedes, as he did not want to deal with McLaren's reliability issues anymore. Yes, Hamilton still managed 4 race wins and Button managed 3, which shows just how much pace that car had, but if it just had a bit more reliability, maybe they could have kept Hamilton in McLaren. But points wise, that season was pretty good, but it then led to the 2013 season. Now, this is where the actual downfall really starts to happen. Hamilton left McLaren for Mercedes, and McLaren only managed 122 points that season as a whole, with Button managing 73 points to Perez's 49. But this was the first season for a while where Button only managed 4th as his best result in the season finale, and Perez's best result was 5th in India, resulting in the first season since 1980 that the team did not get a podium, which obviously shows just how bad of a season that was for McLaren. Now, going into 2014, they actually started the season off very well, with Magnussen managing 2nd in Australia, with Button managing 3rd as well, due to Ricciardo getting disqualified. But from that point onwards, it was very up and down, and that was the only podium both of them would get that whole season, with Button only managing 4th at Canada, Silverstone, Russia and Brazil, and K-Mag managing 5th in Russia as his best result after his 2nd place. So, with McLaren still only 5th in the championship, they decided to jump ship to a new engine supplier. And technically, this was an old partnership, as McLaren moved back to McLaren Honda, which was infamously known for its dominance in the late 80s and early 90s, but it was not meant to be. They brought in Alonso to replace Kevin Magnussen, hoping that a partnership with Button and Alonso would make the team better. But over the next 3 seasons, McLaren only managed 133 points, which is less than they got in the whole of the 2014 season. And so the Honda partnership died very quickly, and with McLaren not wanting to go back to Mercedes, they partnered up with Renault engines. And this is where McLaren started to get better. But of course, like usual, it did not start off perfectly. It was an okay start to their partnership, but McLaren only managed 62 points in that season, coming 6th in the Constructors, which was not terrible considering how bad some of the McLaren Honda seasons were, but it was nothing major, really showing that McLaren itself were a problem as well, and it wasn't the GP2 Honda engine that they were being supplied with. And that really gave McLaren that kick up the backside for 2019, as they wanted a clean slate. And of course, coming into 2019 wanting a clean slate, they got rid of both of their drivers, Fernando Alonso and Stoffel van Dorn, in replace of Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, the new rookie who had just come up from F2. And it worked. McLaren managed 4th in the Constructors' standings, which was the best result since 2012 on standings. However, they still only managed 145 points in this season, but it was a great step in the right direction considering 2015 to 2017, it did not look like they could score more than 100 points in a season. So, for them to finish with 145 points was a much better season. And not only did they score more points than in the last season, they also managed to secure McLaren's first podium since 2012, with Carlos Sainz getting 3rd in Brazil. And it was a very weird podium because he did not know if he had it because Hamilton actually got a penalty afterwards. But no matter how Sainz got the podium, McLaren loved it as it had been a long time coming. Then heading into a very weird 2020 season, which started off in Austria, and with Ferrari's engine being classified as illegal, McLaren had an even better season, managing 3rd in the Constructors with 202 points, their best points pool since 2012. With, of course, the main highlights being Norris's podium in the first race of the season in Austria, and Sainz managing P2 in Monza, almost winning the whole race if he had one more lap left. And not only was it those 2 occasions where McLaren did well this season, but all throughout the season, McLaren did well, with McLaren scoring in all championship races apart from the Russian Grand Prix, which compared to 2018, 2017, 2016 and 2015 was a much needed breath of fresh air for McLaren. And you're right to think that it would only get better, as in 2021, this was McLaren's best season since 2012 on points results. Since 2012, scoring 275 points throughout the season, and technically it was worse on constructor-wise, but that's because Ferrari picked up their socks and actually came 3rd in the Constructors. But 275 points, with Norris also managing podium finishes in Imola, Monaco, Austria, Italy, and he also nearly won the Russian Grand Prix, but due to a mistake he made in the final few laps of the race and not going on to the intermediate tyres, it then meant he crashed out, tumbling down to the lower end of the points and did not win the race. But also in this season, Ricciardo managed a race win, which was the first 1-2 McLaren have had in almost a decade, and was the first time since 2012 where McLaren scored the most points as a constructor in a race. And then Norris ended the season with 160 points, to Ricciardo's 115 points, where he also picked up a 4th in Russia, Spa, and had many more great race results. This meant going into 2022, McLaren fans were very excited and thinking it would only get better. But this is where the regulation changes occurred. With hindsight, this was not the worst season McLaren have had in the last 10 years, with that Honda era and the start to the Renault era being really poor. But with McLaren dropping to 159 points in the season, dropping to 5th in the Constructors as well, losing out to Alpine, it really was a step in the wrong direction, with Norris actually managing 122 points, which was a great season for him. But Ricciardo only could manage 37 points, and this is where people really started to think maybe it wasn't working out between McLaren and Ricciardo. And like as we all know, Ricciardo was sacked by McLaren and got a lovely £18 million payout, which was amazing for Ricciardo, but then meant they signed Oscar Piastri for the season to come. And it was a very risky move, as Piastri just won the F2 championship but was a rookie to F1, and quite a few people thought it was harsh to get rid of Ricciardo. Now, heading into 2023, the season we are in now, as we all know, McLaren had a terrible start to the season. They were literally driving a tractor around some of those tracks, with some of the graphics showing in Saudi Arabia just how far off the pace McLaren were. Same for Bahrain, where they just could not get the car to drive properly. And the McLarens were in the pits every bleeding lap, because their engines were overheating and the whole car just was not working. The package was clearly not ready for the first race of the season. And with that in mind, Norris only managing 3 points paying positions, with 6th in Australia and 9th in Baku and Monaco, and Piastri only managing 8th in Australia and 10th in Monaco. And I think we can all agree, even in Australia, the McLaren said it wasn't off pure pace. That race was just chaos, and because of how far they were back, they just stayed out of trouble and got into the points. So it was not looking good. This was the worst start to a season McLaren had had since the McLaren Honda days, and everyone thought McLaren was done for again, until they started bringing upgrades. Now, McLaren teased that they were putting upgrades onto Norris's car for the Austrian Grand Prix, and everyone thought, okay, maybe this will boost them a little bit. But my god, no one could have imagined how much better the McLaren got. Norris managed 12 points in Austria, of course, over the sprint weekend. And then obviously Piastri got the upgrades fitted in Silverstone, where Norris got that 2nd place finish, with Piastri in 4th. Very unlucky to not get 3rd due to the safety car. But since Austria, McLaren have scored 22 points from Piastri and 48 points from Norris. 70 points altogether, which puts McLaren net 2nd in the Constructors since Austria, on points only obviously behind the Red Bulls, as Ferrari only managed 45 points and Mercedes managed 56 points. So now, the real question is it a fluke, or are McLaren actually on to some consistent pace? Now, the problem is, and I wish and I hope that McLaren can keep up their pace for the rest of the season, but with the way this season's going, I have no clue, as anyone could bring one major upgrade and they're the next best team. We've seen how Aston Martin started, and now they're coming like 8th, 9th, 10th, which is not bad, but nowhere near the podium contenders they were at the start of the season. And of course, like I've talked about McLaren, they started off poorly, like the worst car, and now they're podium contenders. Could Haas do it? Could Alfa Romeo do it? Could Alpine do it? No one knows. Of course, I am hoping that McLaren can keep up their pace, but what do you guys think in the comments down below? Do you think McLaren can keep up with the likes of the Mercedes and the Ferraris, potentially the Aston Martins, or do you think McLaren will be back to the midfield after the summer break? Only time will tell.